Okay, welcome to this Sunday sofa on 11th of October. My name is Jana of Sörensen, and today we will have an all-English Sunday sofa, and we'll look at the case of Germany and make a little bit of comparisons of how Germany has been dealing with this pandemic. And with me today, we have specially to speak about Germany, Claudia Hanson, who is Associate Professor of Health at Karolinska Institutet. Claudia, you're also an epidemiologist. You're also teaching at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And you've worked a lot also in Africa. So you have a wide experience. And we have Jana Bergholtz with us as well, who is actually a doctor of earth sciences and has a background in studying meteorites, and but also working as an advocate for patients with rare diseases on a European level, and has a big engagement in that. So both members of our science forum. So that's the panel today.
And Claudia and I were both German.
That's another qualification, yeah. So I think so. We have a special theme in a way today to talk about look at Germany, and it's also worth noting that this channel has expanded. So we now have, apart from the Sunday sofas, we also have a late night live on Wednesdays where viewers can ask questions directly to somebody in our science forum. And that's evenings on Wednesdays, and we also have the podcast. All these things can be found through our through the web page, and there is also now an interesting webinar with Anders Wahlne, who just spoke at the Swedish American Chamber of Commerce in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. That's very well worth looking at. For an international audience. So, but today we'll talk about Germany, and I think it may be interesting because very often we tend to think that Sweden is kind of similar to Germany, or the Nordic countries and Germany is relatively similar. I think that's in many respects, but in some respects we are maybe not as similar as we think. So it's worth looking at what's been happening here this year during the pandemic. And I'll actually ask Claudia to start presenting in the case of Germany. How have they been addressing the pandemic, and what is specific for Germany?
Yeah. So I have been following, because of interest, the German approach since the very start. So somehow really starting in February, when it became really clear that the whole epidemic is really also coming to Europe and is not contained in China. So I live now in Sweden since quite a long time, but I always look German news. I always have German newspapers. So just because of interest, so I really like to have the perspective continuously of my home country. So, and that is why I will present now a little bit how I saw that Germany was reacting. I'm sharing now the slides, and we will discuss most of all. But I think it's a good thing to show a bit. So now it's there. Show a bit how they went. So as we know, the whole tragedy somehow started in February, without that we actually all realized what was going on, because a lot of cases were flown in from China. But before actually in February, many people became aware. I must say we had Professor Drosten from the Charité in Berlin, who already made actually the testing, the first PCR testing ready in early February. And I think this is some of the things which really went different in Germany from early on. Drosten was involved in the SARS-1 outbreak. He's a very renowned virologist, and he really took it on from the very start and started to actually engage and say and explain what was coming. So, and then the wave did come. So the German wave is to some extent really also a holiday wave. So from people really coming from the Alps, and that is particularly then in Bavaria. But it was also then quickly spreading further because of the Carnival, which was a fantastic situation for the virus, because it's indoors, it's during a cold period, it's with a lot of singing, it's with a lot of alcohol, so it could spread really like stupid. So same situation then at the beginning of March. Everybody became somehow aware there's something big going on, and it also took actually a time before it was really all clear that they were going to a so-called lockdown. That we will look a little bit more careful what this lockdown really was. So it was done then only the 23rd, because it takes some discussion, some time of thinking before we were all actually doing what should have done much earlier. So the so-called lockdown in Germany was they never locked the people in, but they, similar like in Sweden, told the people really to work from home, who could work from home. They also closed the schools, and different from Sweden, they also closed all the restaurants, the pubs. They had all the small shops, so you were only able to buy actually your normal stuff for eating and the food, but all the small other shops for clothing and so on, they were closed. But the people were not locked in, and there was not very much actually of fines, yeah, which is also an important point really to actually keep the population somehow on board and say, so we are not going to lock you in, but we really need you need that you comply. So the first opening was then a month later, and that opening was with a strong advice on mask. And as you know, during this time, there were a lot of studies coming out. It became much clearer what the whole virus is about. And then there were also the first studies coming out really showing that the mask is really something which can help. And then stepwise, there was an opening of schools, there was an opening of shops, and so while bigger events were also still banned, it did become quite open. And one must, for example, say in Nordrhein-Westfalen, for example, it was always possible to visit the elderly in the elderly home. So they never locked them in over a longer period. It was also closed for a certain period, but it was then really opening up when the transmission, as you see, then in May really went very low. So what I think is very special in Germany, and I said that Drosten actually was the one providing WHO and all the European countries first with the PCR. They scaled up the testing very fast. And it is further scaled up. This is a slide which I made by the end of August. It's further really going up. And that was relatively quickly done. And probably also we have a quite privately organized health system. So there are somehow incentives. So it was really possible to scale it up relatively fast. And then there was a wide public engagement. So as all countries at the beginning of the epidemic in March, there were no masks, there were no protection materials really in the health system. So there was really nothing, and it was a big disaster. But there was a lot of involvement from very many people at home, in small NGOs, from a lot of people really trying to tackle this problem. There are a lot of factories who changed their production and really supplied the first the hospitals, then the home for elderlies, and then the private people really with face masks. So that was so it was somehow done in a month. And I still remember that our health minister for a certain period of time was every evening really in the television saying, so is what we did today to manage this problem of not having enough protective materials. So he was really on it, and he had to report to the public every day. So otherwise he really would have been fired at times. So he was under a complete stress really to get the protection materials. So all the time, all the policies were underpinned by the Robert Koch Institute, who is actually quite similar, like the public health institution in Sweden. It's a para-state organization, so it's also paid by the public, but it's somehow half independent organization. So it has the same task like the public health agencies to do the nationwide health monitoring and providing advice to the government. But what is fundamentally really different, it can never take over. So there's an absolute clear firewall between the Robert Koch Institute and the Bundestag, who is really able to make the policy. So they can advise, and different people were asked for advice during this difficult period, but they are not able to actually say this should be done or that should be done. And it's fundamentally really different. So academia played a big role, and in the forefront it's Drosten, who is for sure one of the most important person in this epidemic. He also got a prize from our president last week for really being very important. So he was one of the key advisor, but also he said it was quite limited. So I'm able to advise, but in the end, the decision were really made by the politicians. It was really made by Angela Merkel and her cabinet. It was never the virologist really making the decision. And that is not only given like this because we have a structure like this, it was also explained many times as really important so that the decisions can really done valuing and balancing out many different things, because it's not only the virology or it's not only epidemiology, but it's also how do we deal with people, how do we deal with children, how do we deal with different parts of the society. So the firewall between the academia and also the Robert Koch Institute, that was really purposefully also chosen. So the fantastic thing, what I thought, and I became sometimes quite addicted really to, is that you had an unbelievable, fantastic media response in Germany. So they took it really on. You had Drosten, who was asked then to do a podcast, and he, as a somehow key virologist with plenty of research going on, took at the beginning of the pandemic every day 1 hour to actually explain the whole thing. Yeah. So he looked at new literature. He looked at the preprint servers and said, okay, now this is coming up, and they have been saying this. He also was very frank. I changed my mind because this and this was now coming up, and he somehow helped at least a large part of the German public to really understand the policy approach. He also clearly said, so I'm saying this, but it's not me who decides, and it's good that it's not me who decides. The decision has to be done in another place. And then there were a lot of also quite nice talk shows, typically nicely multi-professional with one or two politicians, somebody from ethics coming up, typically one virologist or one epidemiologist, but really bringing the things also together, discussing the whole pandemic and the response really from many different perspectives. So the media has, for me, played an unbelievable constructive and positive role. They have been criticizing themselves quite a lot because they felt they are too much pro government, pro what is actually going on. So they criticized themselves, but in the end they always said, so it is also so clear we we don't know what to criticize. Yeah, so we don't know really what to come up. They were always trying to find also people for the media who had a little bit opposing view, but it became actually quite difficult. There were a few people. They were also invited, but the largest part of the academia, of the field, were actually quite supporting the overall response. So there was never any. There were debates, but very constructive debates and really very forward-looking, and also I think on a nice way. Also because the media really facilitated this in a fantastic way. And I think we should discuss now a little bit, and you can ask me a few more questions.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. I have several questions already. Already now I want to move to Germany when I see this, because it seems like a paradise in response compared to what we have here in Sweden. I'd like to ask you a few questions, but it's worth noting for any international viewer, you know. One thing I noted here was a quite quick response when it comes to the basics: testing, tracing, quarantine. In Sweden, we still, well, now we started picking up on testing, but a lot of it is self-testing and self-tracing and so on, which is actually a problem. But the face masks, it started in Germany around 20th of April and then increasing levels. And it's an interesting comparison to say that Sweden, we don't have face masks, not even in clinics, not even in birth clinics, heart clinics. If you visit a hospital, you will not have face masks. And in Sweden, this has created a situation where people are even afraid to go to hospital, because you can go, if you're in a risk group, if you go to the hospital, you can get infected because you'll be met by nurses and doctors without face masks. So this is a very big contrast, of course, between Sweden and well, the rest of the world.
My son came last week to Sweden. He said this is surreal. Yeah, so he can't.
Yeah, Syria. It's Sweden, Syria, Sweden, and Syria and Sudan. I think Eritrea, and a few Pacific islands.
Yeah. And
Greenland, where they don't have it, they don't need face masks because they don't have it, are the ones that don't have face masks. The rest of the world have it, and it brings the attention to some questions I have, because this Robert Koch Institute, I'd like to ask you about the relationship between, first of all, what is the expertise there? Because we have the Swedish Public Health Agency. There are no virologists there. They don't have the expertise. They used to have it, but not now. So one question is that, and the other one is, what is the relationship between the Robert Koch Institute and the science community in Germany at the universities? Because in Sweden it's like they don't take in information.
So, as I said, they were all working together. So I'm not sure how many virologists are working at the Robert Koch Institute. I haven't looked it up. Yeah. So it is I mean, it has more people because, okay, we are better, we are a bigger country, so you might have a little bit more expertise, but I think that was never really the issue. So they have done really the epidemiological work, the same like what is the mandate actually of our public health agency in Sweden, but they were always discussing with the West. So I see actually the response as okay, there's Drosten. Okay, it's nice. They all sit in Berlin together. So there were very many people actually sitting together discussing. Okay, you see it more from that side. I see it more from this side. So that's also how I featured it in the many in the media. So how the whole thing was presented. Maybe there were also fights behind the scene, and there's a little bit of problem, for example, between Strait and Drosten. And there are also people who are saying, so why is actually academia now doing the important studies? Why it's not Robert Koch Institute? So there are debates. Yeah, so there are many people who say, so maybe Robert Koch Institute should have been more important. Why is academia actually doing now important children's studies? But in the end, there are debates. They might bring something new up, but sometimes it's also misunderstood objectives of certain groups. But
this sounds to me like. Yeah, this sounds to me like a very good, because you have the expert agencies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the people in the government and ministers, they cannot be experts in all different fields, you know.
No.
So you have the expert agencies, but then the question is, what is the role of the expert agencies? And in Sweden, you usually, I mean, you have expert agencies, for example, in finance or in economy, you've got economists and so on. But it's very transparent, and they either they have a decision-making role like the central banks, but then it's very transparent, or they don't have it. You know, it's the politicians that have it, and then it's but in the Swedish case, you have an expert agency which doesn't actually have the expertise. We've seen that. And they don't have contacts with the universities, or they don't take in information from the surrounding scientific community. In Sweden, we more or less have from VetCov-19, we've written letters and sent in lists of articles and so on, but there is no communication there. It's blocked.
Yeah, but there is communication with certain people, but not all people.
Yeah.
And the problem is that, for me, that Sweden never started a true academic debate with those thinking different. Yeah?
And there is no transparency. In Sweden, there was no transparency. I think it's one of the issues is also transparency. What is the Swedish strategy? People have been speculating because it has never been clear. So the strategy has to be hypothesized and inferred from the actions they've been taken, and from the statements being done and so on. There hasn't never been that. So it's very interesting to hear about this role of the German.
So I really felt we managed to get what I would call an adult academic discussion. Yeah, so where different perspectives, different opinions are to a large extent taken care of. There might be certain people who also would say, no, that didn't happen in Germany. So there are some at the extreme, yeah. But I think the largest part were really well accommodated. And it was very much liked that many people raised their voice. And there has been, so because it's not only academia and the Robert Koch Institute, but we have a lot of research institutions which are also to a large extent independent, like the Paul-Ehrlich Institute, the Fraunhofer Institute. So all these institutions actually came early on in the pandemic up with position papers, and they were sent to the government. So further informing the the approach. So they were taken up from the media discussed them. So we had also a discussion from the ethics council. The ethics council was then putting forward also, please consider this, consider that. And that was constantly actually providing new inputs. And it was also from the very beginning completely clear, we will not drive one thing up to the end, but we will adapt to our learning. So from the very beginning, it was figured into the approach, sure, we are not going to have a lockdown long, and we have to see what we do, but we will, was also the trust, we will find the way to get out of the lockdown.
Yeah.
So it was
I think it's what you see is an intellectual mobilization. In a pandemic, you need an intellectual mobilization, not only of virologists, or you need them, or epidemiologists, which you also need, but you need biostatisticians, you need economists, you need
ethicists.
Ethicists, yeah, in Sweden especially, I think. But you need a broad intellectual mobilization, because it's a big, huge societal impact, and it's a big, it's like a crisis response. And in most situations of a crisis response, you actually need this broad mobilization, which we have not had in Sweden.
But in Germany, you have also the advantage that you have a chancellor who used to be a scientist, so she knows what exponential growth is. And I think that also helped the Germans on the right trajectory.
I think that's a very important point, Jana, that you mentioned that, because I've often thought that what's going on in Sweden would not be possible at this stage in Germany, because for exactly the reason you say, you have a chancellor who has a science training. She's a physicist, right?
We have people with a PhD and professors from Harvard in
Yeah, and in Sweden you actually have the least educated government in Europe.
Really?
You have the ministers, they have a few university courses, some of them, but most of them are uneducated, and the prime minister has no training, and that means that they are probably it's easier for lobbyists and others to sort of, it's more difficult for them to assess what is actually coming from the science community, or what is I think that's one thing in Sweden. You have politicians, they enter politics from maybe the age of 15, 16. Many of them have never even worked outside the political party. They have no, and if you look at it comparatively, it's actually a really poor educated government in Sweden at the moment. We actually wrote an article about that, and some others followed up on it. But I think that can have consequences in a crisis like this.
When it's clear, the Robert Koch Institute, I talked with people, they were saying it was fantastic to talk with Merkel. She could immediately understand. She was able also to explain to the public, for example, the things of the reproductive rate. Yeah, so it all just came completely natural. Yeah, so but I think it's not only it was helpful. Yeah, but she also has she has an empathy for the people. She wants to drive the things, and then also what is deeply entrenched for me in the German population is that they are ready to do something. Yeah, so that was the whole thing with the mask. When at that moment the masks were not available, and when the health minister couldn't supply what he should supply, so they were really on him. Yeah, so it would never have been accepted by the German population what happened here in Sweden, that the mask and all these things came in the home for elderly in June or July only. So that would have been
they still don't have it. They still don't have face masks.
Yeah, and some still don't have it. Yeah,
yeah. Well, many still don't have it.
Yeah, but then the people just made them. They made a nice, so it became a culture of actually, so I do this, yeah, and I do something good, yeah. So, and I believe that Germany will come out of this with a huge boost of, we have managed to suffer through, we have helped each other, yeah, we have protected our the population which needed protection. So they will again actually. So first we have the reunification, then we have this financial crash. Now we have the next one, and with every step, I feel that Germany is actually really strengthening itself. Yeah, strengthening the policy, trying to learn, and I mean it's clear we have an NGO society. Yeah, so we have a public which stands up. So sometimes for the good, sometimes also where I think, yeah, but it's open. People go on the street, people protest, yeah, people raise their voice, and I mean there is not. I'm not. But it's also safe in German to be a bit outspoken.
Jana, you say something, yeah.
Yeah. So what we have in Germany is, it's also called Streitkultur. So we like to be critical and speak up when we think something is wrong. And sometimes that leads to fights and gets emotional, but that's totally okay, because we learn that we need to show emotions, and it's a good thing to do that. And of course, there are now also groups that are going out on the streets in Berlin and other cities, and they sort of want to advocate against face masks and against these restrictions. And I could see that as a potential danger, that cases might be rising a bit quicker more again now, because, yeah, the social media, I guess, is helping to polarize people, and I was hoping that people would be smart enough to not fall for that so much, to be able to stay on the good side and not, yeah, how can I say? I mean, you would hope when there's a pandemic coming, and you realize, oh, it's going to be the vulnerable people that will be most affected, and most likely are going to have either critical illness or die, then you would hope that people are empathetic enough to really listen to the government, listen to what needs to be done, and do these things, like wear their face masks. I guess they had these AHA abbreviation, A for Avstand, for keeping distance, H for hygiene, and A for Ansichtsmask. Yeah. So and this is what I like here in Sweden. We have much more of a consensus culture here, and people really want to follow this and want to do good things. And it would have worked so well if we had the German government here in Sweden. Then everyone would have done this.
Or the Finnish, or any other government. I think it's
that I also believe, and that's where I feel the whole thing is so terrible, because I mean you wouldn't have needed to put anything more than actually providing clear information, providing the right information, putting out recommendations, and the whole thing would have worked. Maybe closing down the society in March really for 2 weeks, probably that would have been enough. Yeah.
So just to emphasize,
unbelievable population. Yeah.
Just to emphasize the difference, some of the differences here. So in Sweden, we still don't have face masks in clinics, in hospitals, in care homes. Some care homes and some individuals make the decision locally, and there are very often it's the shields, which are cheaper. Maybe, but they don't actually protect against aerosols.
No.
But here, the Public Health Agency have not made clear that it's an aerosol spread. They still speak about that it's only drop spread. So although it's been probably known since March that aerosol spread is at least an important component of this, maybe even the main component now. But in Sweden, that's not acknowledged. So
no, it's not acknowledged. It's also
not acknowledged.
Nobody understands my player. Can we open the windows? We can't open the windows in my institution, for example.
No, so you will still not even have the ventilation thing. So actually, some of our colleagues say that we're a little bit like the flat earthers in Sweden. Sweden is like the flat Earth society. We don't acknowledge the face mask, the aerosol spread, and also we don't acknowledge really the asymptomatic spread, which I think is an important thing, because there is still advice to go to work even if your partner has tested positive for COVID or so on. In many care homes, you still have administrators who say to their staff, go and work, even if there's one who has been tested positive, the others have to go to work, nurses or people in care homes. So you still have that in Sweden. The recommendation changed when it came to families, that if one of them has been tested positive, the other one should quarantine, but not the children. They can go to school.
Yeah.
So in Sweden, it's quite surreal.
Yeah.
It's surreal experience. But I think,
and for me, it really doesn't speak to me. If it would be a huge economic sweat of actually staying home this one week, but it isn't. It is also in a place like Stockholm, a large part, if not 60% of the population, have no problems to work from home. Yeah.
No.
So this society has so unbelievable advantages of having an educated population, people to work at home, relatively small families, relatively few who live with the elderly together. So little density. So when we meet, we are not used to kiss each other. We don't. Yeah. So there's so little actually change which would need to happen.
Yeah.
To make it an extremely safe society.
Yeah, I'd like to break it up a little bit in comparing a few points, because I think that we learn a lot during a pandemic. We learn a lot about people. We learn a lot about the society and about how the state works and so on. And I think that one of the narratives about Sweden is that it's a welfare state. Mm-hmm. And it's run by a social democratic and green government, which very often describes itself as being in solidarity and humanistic and so on. But I think that what has been revealed here is that it's actually this welfare state has been, at best, it's been a honey trap, and at worst, it's been a fraud, because the people who really needed the help, they were selected away very early. Were not admitted to intensive care units. We have this that still needs to be investigated further. This all these incidents where people have been denied oxygens and given morphine instead. They've had a too speedy decision to go into palliative care, even without meeting the patient. Even sometimes over the phone, that will probably have to be investigated more in Sweden. But then we also have solidarity, the risk groups, basically by allowing the spread, free spread in society, people in risk groups, they have had to take their own decision and lock themselves in. And many people are sitting locked in for 7 or 8 months, self-isolating for 7 or 8 months now. And they may not even dare to go to the hospital because there will be no face masks used there. So if they go there, they can get infected there. And when it comes to nurses, many nurses have expressed deep concern about their health, their work environment. It's also school teachers. many nurses and school teachers are women, so I don't know what the solidarity is here. So I think this thin veil of solidarity has cracked up in Sweden. It's an image that hasn't really held water in this crisis. And I'd like to say, just think, why is this so? We talked about the expert agencies and differences between the expert agencies and their role vis-a-vis the politicians in Germany and in Sweden, and vis-a-vis the scientific community wider. That's something we could maybe talk about more. Another is this education of the, Jana mentioned that it's good to have somebody in the government who understands exponential growth and who doesn't confuse exponential growth or compare it with raw data series, for example, or linear developments or things like that. But it's also important to have, just a second, it's also, I think, important to see the civil society that you mentioned, Claudia, and I think we should go into that a little bit, because civil society, yeah.
So, Imane, we have a completely different history, which one shouldn't forget. Yeah, and during that time, the Germans didn't stand up. Yeah, so during the Dritte Reich, people were silenced and people were silent. And I think for the generation after, it was very clear we will never be silent again. Yeah, if we feel that something is not right, we have to stand up. Yeah, so we have to say, and everybody has to stand up, and you try really to find your group. And we have more civil society groups also which come out of that time. So although the church didn't play a big role in this pandemic up to now, so many people have also criticizing this, but you can go to a church and you have a safe place where you actually can discuss. And we have good connections between the main people from the church to the government again. So things can move, things can be brought in. So we have really a culture of civil society driving policies. So bottom up inclusion of the civil society, that's a main red thread. Yeah. And it's extremely important. And I have always been at my working place also thinking, so why are we never making some small groups who are discussing things? So if we think actually we should move this forward, can we make a quick interest group, and then we can then we can move it? Yeah. So that is my way of working. So can we meet 2-3 times and then we put the things forward? Yeah. So that is done in committees. So if there is a formal committee, then you can do it there, but you don't make this ad hoc groups.
I think the role of civil society is interesting, because I think maybe there is an even deeper history than the Second World War. You mentioned Germans sort of think we should never be silent again in the face of when things go wrong. But I think there is maybe even a deeper tradition. I don't know. I'm just speculating. Civil society, for example, civil society is understood in many different ways, and its origins was that it was like a civil society. It was basically like the state. You know, it goes back to ancient Rome, societas civilis or societas civita. It was the partnership under law, and to be civil and to be a citizen meant to behave like a citizen. And I think in the German tradition, there are actually 2 words for civil society. There is bürgerliche Gesellschaft, which is the old tradition of citizen, actually centered around the town and around maybe the middle class and so on, but to behave like a citizen and so on. But then there is another word, which is Zivilgesellschaft.
Yeah.
And Zivilgesellschaft in German actually is an import from the Anglo-Saxon civil society, because that concept of civil society was about associations and organizations. It's become more and more around NGOs. Also, you should talk about media. But I think in Sweden, you have a lot of organizations and associations. So if you look at it and study it, it looks like there is a thriving civil society in Sweden, many, many organizations. But the interesting thing is that most of them are actually getting financing from the state. So there is a sort of strong link between many of those associations are dependent on financing from the state. And many of them have not really, there hasn't really been any mobilization there. I'm thinking about, for example, this thing about face masks in clinics, in heart clinics and birth clinics. Why are the Swedish doctors or physicians, the Swedish Medical Association, not speaking up about this? To me, that's absolutely amazing. I mean,
I have been saying this, why have people not been on the street to get at least the face mask into the home for elderly, into the clinics? I can't understand.
Another thing in Sweden
some
is
of them have
some of them, but it's very small. So it's nothing which comes out big.
No, even the seniors, there are senior organizations in Sweden. So there's there's 2 pensioner organizations, and they are actually also in a way politically oriented. So one is more towards the social democratic tradition and the other one not. But even they have not spoken up against why are they not using face masks in care homes and so on. So it's a remarkable monolithical society in Sweden. And now we have Jana are actually one of those who have organized protests around these issues. So what is your experience, Jana, with this?
Well, the one thing that I organized was a bit of a Twitter action with the hashtag Bytstrategy nu. And otherwise, I haven't been too involved in the local demonstrations because I'm considering myself to be in a risk group and I don't really want to go out. But my view is that because when you speak up here in Sweden, you get so much confronted with hate and also just mean comments that it's holding you back to do more. And
social control.
Yeah. And so, okay, maybe I need to step back because I mean, I'm German, and as a German, I feel like something that happened in the Third World War should not happen again. So if there's any vulnerable group that is not protected enough, I feel this strong need that I need to speak up. So that's why I couldn't stop myself. I needed to speak up. And I could not understand why the other Swedes that are also in the risk group are not with me on that. I at first I just didn't realize what was going on here. I was like, why are you silent? Why are you even trying to stop me from speaking up? So I mean, I think if there wasn't so much hate and if there wasn't so many nasty reactions, there would be more people speaking up, and there would be more people on the streets, and it would be more okay to speak up.
Yeah. But and the social control here is that you're criticizing Sweden or criticizing the government. So you should be more loyal to the government or to. It's
yes.
a kind of we've talked about it. We've talked about it as Corona nationalism or something like that.
Yeah,
yes.
That's also something. I couldn't believe it. So particularly my generation, how I grew up was never trust any organization. Always ask them. So it was hammered in my whole school education, my whole university education. Never trust, always ask. And that's what I did at the beginning of the pandemic. I asked my colleagues, can you please explain why they do it like this? Yeah. So it was not coming from a per se mistrust. Yeah. It was a completely normal thing. I want to understand. I want to understand. And without understanding, I can never trust. So it is also in the normal way how we go to a doctor. It's not the older generation maybe doing so good, but we want the things explained. But if somebody explains it and it sounds logic, then it's fine.
It's maybe also our scientific nature, Claudia, because I mean, this is also the science method, right? You always ask questions and you always question.
You always question. So Imane, I also want to point out, in Germany, the limitation section was written when the first word was coming out. Yeah, it was always clear. We have to change. We don't know. We have to adjust. We will apologize. And the whole narrative for many people was actually, we are very limited. We try now to do the best. Yeah, but nobody ever came up. We know what to do. We know what is. We know what is right and what is wrong. The limitation section was extrememe important.
One of the things that have amazed me maybe the most is how come Swedish doctors accept not using face masks in clinics. How come in care homes and so on? How come that is? And they typically refer to the recommendations of the Swedish Public Health Agency, which still is basically just wash your hands, you know. I think maybe one other issue here is about responsibility and accountability. Yeah. There doesn't really seem to be any accountability attached to what's going on in Sweden, because the government has said, even the ministers have said, that we don't have this expertise, so it's on the Public Health Agency. The Public Health Agency don't recommend, they don't acknowledge asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic spread very much. They may have maybe updating it now a bit. I hope they do. Same with aerosol spread and hence the face masks. And then they don't recommend it. And then when you go out to the care homes, which is often run by bigger companies, or if they're private, or to the clinics, they say, well, we follow the recommendations of the Swedish Public Health Agency. And the Public Health Agency, well, we don't have a responsibility for the hospitals. That's the regions. And the regions say, well, we follow the Swedish Public Health Agency recommendations. Or they say, we don't have responsibility for the care homes. That's the companies. And they say, in turn, well, we follow their. So
the accountability is
it goes around. There's been a lot of talk about herd immunity. You know, I think if there's one thing Sweden has herd immunity in, it is lack of accountability. We're immune against accountability. And I think that's been one of the things in Sweden. And I don't know how it is in Germany. Do you know?
So, I mean, a doctor who thinks that something is not right would, first of all, probably speak out, would try to convene a group, would try to grow, and then the things are somehow put up and forwarded to make a change. And I would think there's so more really standing up and also doing things which if one believes this is the right thing, then one does it. It's also, I have been reflecting a bit on evidence-based medicine. So Sweden has a very strong, the medicine is really based on evidence-based medicine, which I think in principle is good. Yeah, so I'm not against it. I would say the German system is much more evidence informed. So that means that the individual doctor looks at the evidence. Yeah, if he thinks this evidence is the right evidence actually for that patient, then he would say, I'm following this, but he still would think. Yeah, and a specialist actually coming up and saying, I think it's this, or I think it's this, has a value. And that is also why Drosten so early on actually could move things, could alert things, because up to maybe I would say in April, in August, we had hardly any evidence on anything. Yeah, so if we were
I think it's important.
So we needed an approach where actually people were thinking and saying, this is logic. I look at that piece, what I get, and I think this is what we have to do, and that is possible because the individual expertise, particularly as it was also a broader expertise, it were many people really talking and coming together. That is valued.
I think regarding evidence-based, it's worth saying. First, I'd like to say we have a very good discussion on evidence-based and levels, hierarchies of evidence in one of the Sunday sofas by Karina King, which is worth listening to. It's just a couple of minutes, but she really lays out what it means. But I think when it comes to this evidence-based thing, one of the things sort of the gold standard is this about double-blind.
It's a randomized control.
Randomized control trials, and it's worth saying that there are a lot of things that there are no randomized control trials for, because either you can't do them or it would be unethical. So there is no evidence-based. There are no randomized control trials for parachutes, for example.
No,
do they work? But there is also not, just a second, Claudia, there is also not any evidence-based, any randomized control trials for a lot of the advice that they actually give. Wash your hands is one of the mantras of the Swedish Public Health Agency, or sneeze in your elbow.
The distance is also not super clear. Yeah, so you cannot say how much protects actually 1 meter, how much protects 1.5 meters, how much protects 2 meters. So, but we also have some experimental things, and we have some also logic thinking. Yeah, and particularly also the experimental thing actually. So, how far do the droplets go? So what is this whole thing with the aerosoling? How can it stand in the air? The experimental things also have in this pandemic an important point, because they can help to understand.
Do you think that German medicine, I think this is an important point, whether evidence-based medicine in principle is good, but it also needs to be tempered by reason and experience and precautionary principles. If we don't have evidence for something, but we need to act quick, then we should follow the precaution principle, which we haven't done in Sweden.
Absolutely.
You don't wait for evidence. I've often said, if you see a stone in the forest and you don't know if it's a stone or if it's a bear, it's better to run. It's better to mistake the bear for a stone than to mistake the stone for a bear. So it's this evidence informed. It's quite a good word, because it brings attention to something important. That's the method, scientific method. What is it worth in different, and how should it be used, and so on. But I also like to ask, do you think that German medicine is more patient-centered, maybe?
I also think, I personally feel it's more it's more patient-centered. But I must say, I like the attention to evidence-based medicine, and I don't want to. It is really a good thing. But I also like people who are standing up and say, actually, in this case, I know all the evidence, but I personally feel it would better be probably for this patient, and I cannot explain completely that we do this, or that you discuss certain strategies. So, for example, you do your breast screening every 2 years, yeah. And it's very difficult here in this country to do it in any other way, because this is the evidence and it's all fine, yeah. But you cannot come and say, actually, so I don't have that risk factor and that risk factor and that risk factor. Can we do it every 3 years? Because I think that is enough. It's impossible, yeah. And in the German system, you would have a discussion with the doctor, and he would tell you, you think you don't have a risk, but I actually think you really should confirm, because it's 1, 2, or 3. These are the reasons why you really should do it, or you are actually quite right, and we do it only every 3 or 4 years, because in your case, actually, it's true, you have a low risk. Yeah. So this kind of discussion can't take place.
And patients have more rights in Germany, actually.
Yeah. So they have more rights, and they have, in particular, actually the right to have things explained. And coming back to something earlier, which put me off already quite a few years, and that was the swine flu examination, where you really had mass vaccination, which I thought would only happen in other countries. Yeah, so I was for the vaccination because I thought it's good. I'm in principle a public health researcher. I'm for vaccination, and but I know that all vaccination has also in the end a small risk. So I value that somebody explained that's the benefit, that's the risk. But here in Sweden, it was a mass vaccination. Do you have an allergy? No, puke. Do you have an allergy? No, puke. So that was the way how it was done, and I couldn't believe it. So that was the first time that I really felt, am I in a socialistic country? What's this?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just wanted to briefly say something about the patient rights in Germany, because you actually have a lot more rights as a patient. You are much more self-determined in a way, and you can complain. It's a bit different system than in Sweden, where you can do an anmälan, but here you can also, if the doctor screws up, let's say, he can be made responsible, really. And it can go to a lawsuit, and I think it's much more, how can I say, much more strict in a way, and that's why doctors really cannot screw up or cannot do unethical things. And here in Sweden, I mean, there has been several like Macchiarini, and I guess this is taken to a lawsuit, but it feels like in Sweden the doctors are more protected in a way. And
there are no court cases in Germany. I worked in obstetrics. I felt every day that I'm actually with one foot in a prison. So it was going a bit too far, I felt, because it was really every day I was thinking, so have I really done everything right? Yeah.
But I think in Sweden you have
even who got a court case not having done actually anything, but really wrong. But so she really had to defend herself. So it's sometimes it goes a bit too far, yeah. But in the end, you really also have rights, and the rights are spelled out. It's also in the COVID actually. I mean, there are plenty of court cases. There are plenty of people who actually have been going to court because they were told, for example, to isolate having come back from Sweden at the beginning. So we have court cases for everything. So many are managed locally. Then they are also taken sometimes. These local things are actually then fiddled in again in a revision of the law, because it becomes clear it cannot go like that. Yeah. So there are important points to continuously adjust. continuously.
Here we have the problem with, I think the biggest scandal now is about rejecting people, certain old people and so on, not sending them to care units, and the question about giving morphine instead of oxygen, which has to be further investigated, I'm sure, because that's but also just simple things. Well, not so simple, but you know, can you ask your doctor to have a face mask on if you go to a clinic, if you're in a risk group, you know, or do you go there at your own peril and take the risk of being infected by? But I wanted to move on and actually say a few things, just make some comparative reflections about how society mobilizes in a crisis. And it seems to me that your presentation, Claudia, there was a very quick mobilization in Germany regarding, well, first the basic thing, the 101 in this pandemic, it's the testing, tracing, and quarantine, right? Which in Sweden, they just dropped it sometime in spring, and then it was actually the government instructed the public health agency to take it up. Late spring, it didn't happen, or it happened very slowly and it didn't quite work. And then patients were asked to trace themselves and things like that, you know. And now it's picking up a little bit, but it's been after 8 months in a pandemic, and that's the basic thing. And then the other thing is equipment. I'm not just talking about face masks, but that's an important thing, which seems to there was a fast reaction in Germany, a fast mobilization. And in Sweden, I think it was more a paralysis and confusion, and still is.
And you can't do this in Germany. You would get
sometimes
fired.
Just a second. I think sometimes in Sweden, it's been blamed on the fact that we have a regionalized system. So we have 21 regions, and every region is responsible for the hospital and healthcare in the region. But in Germany, you have a federal system with 6 states.
And it was many people actually say that the federal system was a particular strength in this pandemic. So so for sure it's also that the mothers and the fathers of this federal states somehow went a little bit in competition. So everybody wanted actually the best for her individual state. So it was really very important really to really do the right things, to really meet the population's need. Yeah, and it also gave the possibilities to really do something which is nuanced. And I think that the approach now in Germany is a precision public health. It is very data driven, and it is really trying to do something in very much looking at a very concrete local situation. And that is something which is also possible because of the federal system, because within the federal system, they can say, so this we can do here. And there are some federal states, for example, they say we have hardly any infection. We are not going to do A, B, and C. Yeah, but they are responsible. So we had one case, for example, when too many people were coming back then in early September to Bavaria, and the cases were really going up. They said we are going to test. We offer a test for everybody who comes back from holiday. And then there was a disaster happening that they tested people and didn't get the results out. So, and then the health minister actually was standing there and saying, okay, I can step down. I didn't manage my office, so I'm ready to go. And then it was more or less really the people saying, no, stop. This is within all the epidemic still so small. You are not stepping down for not getting 1,000 results back to the people. Yeah, better get this done in the next 2 days.
But I think that's must be related somehow to accountability, because in Sweden, even though you have all these 21 regions, it seems that those regions are following those Smittskyddslaker are the responsible doctors for in respective region. They seem to completely follow the Swedish Public Health Agency. So it seems to be very monolithic. And I think it must be connected to accountability. There is no, if you don't follow them, then maybe that damages your career somehow. So it's better to just, I don't know, maybe Swedish, maybe we could do study visits to Germany to see how Germany functions and how Sweden can be reformed in its government structure, because it doesn't work very well in a crisis here.
No, I mean, I'm amazed. So, I mean, I really must admit. So maybe I'm seeing the things a little bit like somebody in a honeymoon, yeah. But I have been criticizing the German government for many things. So I'm more a critical person, also seeing the health system is really big, yeah. I mean, there are unnecessary interventions. There are sometimes too little evidence-based medicine. So I had typically more critical stand, and it's also, I mean, women don't have the same say, and it took for almost 5 months before Angela Merkel stood up that the children are not allowed to be the loser of the epidemic. So I think I have a lot of sympathy also in Sweden that the children should be the loser of the epidemic. That was clear from the very start. Yeah, in Germany it took it took a bit of time, and it took a bit of NGO mobilization to get it up. Yeah, but you can change it. Yeah. So it was happening after 4 months. So it didn't stay there for months and months and months. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
I
so
think
that is really the good thing. So I just want to say, so Imana, I'm happy also to criticize, and the Germans are typically criticizing. They are now completely stuck with me. So you see the whole thing too idealistic, but Imana, from looking from here, I just love the NGO involvement. So it is really completely clear that in Germany it's everybody's business to manage this epidemic. Yeah, and it's also very clear. People know, and people are clever, and people know their things.
I think. Regarding speaking up and critique and so on, I think it's the foundation for all intellectual development. It's, of course, as academics, that's what we want in the university. We want to test different ideas and so on. But I think also in a society, it's important to say that even in a society, it's important to actually reflect and put up different opinions to somebody who has power, but nobody who speaks against is in trouble because they become insulated. And this is an old tradition. We know this from the court jester in European history has had a function to little bit do that. And the Catholic Church, they had this institution from the 15th century of the devil's advocate. They actually removed it in 1983 or so, but it was somebody should speak against, disregarding whether it was his own opinion or not. When they wanted to proclaim saints, they appointed a cardinal to can you give all the arguments against, so we get a good discussion. And this is also a tradition we have in our court systems. You have a prosecutor and a defender and so on. So you get this intellectual debate, and I think it's particularly important in a crisis like this that we have that. And in Sweden, it's been well, I mean, we're trying to provide. We're doing that, but it's been the media has not been. You mentioned the media in Germany, and I think in Sweden the media. for months and months, they didn't ask any questions any critical questions about Swedish strategy. Is there anything more we should bring up that we haven't?
Well, for me, when I look at the differences between Sweden and German response, what I saw in Germany, it was very much prevention, and we need to make sure to take care of our risk groups. We need to protect them. So prevention and protection of risk groups. And then it was also the podcasts by Christian Drosten, which when I listened to them, it was just for a comparison, it was so different from what I heard here from the Public Health Agency that made me even question more, that they were talking so early about aerosols and airborne transmission that and obviously they were introducing the face masks so much earlier also, that it made me so upset that Sweden could continue not following ECDC, not following WHO. They've kept going with their line of arguments.
Yeah. With the Flat Earth Society, we are.
Yeah. And for me, it was not clear, why is it that the Swedes don't see this other side, the international scientific consensus, and then why can't they find their inner strength to speak up? Because I thought that would be easy to realize that now is not the time to be quiet. Now is the time to really speak up and also find your inner strength to do so.
Maybe we can have that as a challenge to, if there is the people who watch this, if they're doctors and in clinics, consider using face masks. Consider the evidence there is for aerosol spread and asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic spread. Maybe we could also use it as a sort of encouragement to individuals, to look at what the rest of the world is also doing. What is the ECDC saying? What is the World Health Organization saying? Why are Sweden going such a separate way and at such a high cost for risk groups? Okay, I think we've had a quite intense discussion and looked at Germany. I'm thinking maybe I should move to Germany after this. I'm not sure I want to stay here, but I'd like to say to all you who have been listening, thank you for listening, and I'd like to say thank you especially to Claudia and Jana. Claudia for presentation and Jana for all the discussion and input you've given. So
yeah, and we just probably, you are also homesick, Claudia. I don't know. Maybe it's worth saying.
Really homesick. Yeah.
So
I understand that maybe now, but okay. Thank you.
I haven't been homesick for many years, but since, as I said, so since March, really also listening to Drosten, and one shouldn't forget, this podcast has 60 million downloads in German language. Yeah, it's not English. Yeah, it's an amazing success.
Unlike you, I think this pandemic has made me away sick rather than. But okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.